We are live on Facebook for the B2B Community Builder Show. We're in season 5. It's episode like 180 something. I've lost track, but we got an unbelievable show today. I'm your host and Chief Executive Connector, Pablo Gonzalez. And today we got a guest host again. He's back. He was so good a couple of weeks ago when I was out of here that the people wanted more. Isar, welcome to the show. My business partner at Be The Stage, the Israeli Tom Cruise, because he's a jet fighter pilot, wearing the coolest hat in the world. Isar Meitzis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, bro. This is so exciting. I must say something before we dive into the whole topic of the show, which is exciting by itself. We've been talking about doing this for 2 years-ish, and we're finally doing it, and it's so exciting, and it's so fun, and it's great to do, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking for questions from the audience, and I'm looking for a great interaction with David.
All right. Well, why don't you intro him, Isar?
Let's do this. So really, we're very passionate about community. That's what we do. Like, we're passionate about our own community of, business leaders who people believe in relationships and community. We help other businesses build community. So community building is our thing. And if you consider like the world of community building and you look at the 800-pound gorilla, like the thing about community building, the number one company that comes to mind is Meetup. And a little bit of statistics about what I mean. Meetup has over 300,000 community groups around the world. It has over 60 million members in 193 countries, which, as far as I know, is every country around the planet. So literally, if there's somebody that knows about community building and how to set it up and what makes it work and so on, is the people at Meetup. And who's better than that than the CEO of Meetup, David Siegel? And to complete this thing on how amazing this thing is, how did I get to have David Siegel on the show is through our community. So thanks, Lori Goldman, for making the introduction. But again, it's community just makes everything so more exciting and so much easier and gives you access to people you would never otherwise have access to. So we're going to talk about community and community building and everything around it, and how core values have to do with that, and how transparency has to do with that. And we're going to do this with David Siegel, the CEO of Meetup. David, welcome to the show.
I am excited to be here. I have to say, I know a lot about community, but if you're going to ask me about community in North Korea, can't help you. We're in 193 countries. We're not in North Korea. We're trying to talk to Dennis Rodman because he knows, he knows
people
over there. People. And then if we get him on the show, then I could talk about that. But we're in every country but North Korea, basically.
Fair. So no North Korea questions. Damn it. Okay, Pablo, scratch the North Korea questions.
Yeah. Only certain haircuts you can have in North Korea, and mine wasn't allowed, so that was that.
Lori, start working on the Dennis Rodman intro ASAP, please. We need the worm on the show. Great t-shirt, David. We love when you're repping the brand. Isar's repping the Be The Stage hat. I'm out here like a sucker just wearing a stupid polo shirt, but we're going to have a good time. As we love to say, this is a community-driven show, just like Isar was allotted to. Right now, we got 2 of our superstar community members in the house with us. We got Don Bates, a prolific author, prolific activist on human rights, solving some of the biggest problems. As you know, I like to call out that she is an Oxford PhD candidate, Don. I know that you're uncomfortable, but it is what it is. And then we got Lori Goldman, the super connector of the show today, the person that introduced us to David, another great community member of us. We're going to be sharing the stage at CMX a little bit later this year with Lori. We found out that you got tapped on to speak. Love having you here. And right after this, we're going to roll into our relationship-driven growth strategy sessions. So stick around till the end, and we're going to get into a couple of things that Isar and I are seeing in the ecosystem that have to do with the intersection between relationships, business growth, and how you can succeed with all this good stuff. So without further ado, we like to get right to the meat, no pun intended, of the show. David, you became CEO of Meetup not that long ago, right? So I assume that there was some kind of LeBron James-esque courting process where they were bringing you around and taking you out to dinner. But, what I really want to know is, what's the pitch? What's the pitch to somebody of your ability, of your stature, to be the CEO of the category king of community as we know it in the digital age?
Okay. First, I just have to say I'm speaking at CMX also. So
let's go.
Let's make sure that we plan beforehand to get together. And Lori, same thing.
Laurie's
I'll be
already
there.
doing it, by the way. She was like, "Yeah, we're getting together for dinner, so don't miss out this date, this
Good.
time." I already got it on the calendar,
let's
so you're all
let's
good.
make sure. I literally right before this, I was figuring out what hotel I was going to stay in right nearby. So maybe we'll be in the similar hotels. We could
Cool.
hang
Awesome.
out and breakfast together. Okay. So the pitch that they pitched me or that I pitched to them, which one?
Why did you want to be the meetup?
Okay. So here's the reason. I have always been kind of obsessed with community, literally from a young age. I remember I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and I still am one. And, in times of sorrow, when someone, let's say, passes away, there's something called Shiva. And, hundreds of people come to your home to not just eat lots of bagels and lox, but more importantly, to be there to help to support you in your time of grief and time of challenge. And I remember that happening when my grandparents passed away, etc. When my father passed away in my adult life, and they're there for you in times of challenge. And then, of course, if someone had a baby, then like our community that I grew up in would like flood food into that person. Everything's food-based, right? In Miami community, Pablo as well, and and sort of my community. They flood you with food for the first month. You're not even making any food. So community was always just like deeply a part of my life. I had always gone to meetup events. I had loved meetup. I was not a meetup organizer, but I always gone to meetup events and just loved meeting people. And I'm kind of like obsessed with people. Like decisions aren't like the products aren't built. People build products. Like companies aren't built. People build companies. Everything is about people. I even worked in human resources early in my career because I was obsessed with kind of the impact of people, in every aspect of someone's life. So what happened was someone on the board of WeWork reached out to me. I was the CEO of Investopedia, which is the world's largest financial education company. We sold the company and I was planning on like going to the beach or going hiking in the Himalayas, just taking a whole lot of time off and just being able to just get my centering again. And someone reached out to me a week after we sold the company from the board of WeWork and said, David, you need to become the first outside CEO of Meetup and take over for the founder. And all I heard to hear was the word Meetup, and I was like, I'm in. That was it. Now I also had to hear WeWork, and because WeWork was in the news and WeWork was, the next Apple and $47 billion valuation, I was like, my God, so I get to do good and then have, make enormous sums of money off of WeWork stock, which ended up being worth about $12.34 at the end. But I was like, whoa, what a great opportunity. So only 27 interviews later, I ended up actually getting the job. That small meeting Adam Newman just a couple of times and others, and it worked out.
That's epic, man. That's epic. And it's interesting. Right after Isar onboarded you for this call, he reached out and told me about that story. And I've heard you on a couple of other podcasts since as well. And the birth of this company and everything that we do, it also coincides with a moment of sorrow, right? Like it was a moment where when I lost my brother, 1,200 people, I'm not Jewish. I've always wanted to be, but I grew up Catholic. And when I lost my brother, 1,200 people showed up to our church. And that was the moment that I realized, the value of community and this idea that I also went from this moment of just like, man, I've always kind of like poo-pooed this idea of being not always, but since I was in my 20s, I've been kind of running away from the Catholic Church. At that moment, I realized I was never leaving because it was my community, that parish specifically. And I started thinking of it as a business problem, like as a wow, this solves for churn. Like I'm not going to churn from here ever. After the fact, and I wonder, it's an incredibly compelling thing on a personal level. I wonder what when you first started thinking, heck yeah, I want to be the CEO of Meetup, what do you see as the business opportunity for community in big picture and where you're taking the company?
Sure. I mean, right now, as it stands, there's a reason why the Roaring 20s became the Roaring 20s 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, there was the dual threat or dual reality of the Spanish flu, where tens of millions of people died, and World War I, where also tens of millions of people died as well. And people were just stuck in their homes, and it was a terrible time for people and just lots of pain. It's not a coincidence that the Roaring 20s happened right after that, because people have this inherent it's biological. We couldn't survive as Paleolithic and Neolithic men without community. So it's inherent within us. And then when it got subjugated in the late 1918, 1919, 1920, 1921, got subjugated and people couldn't go out and do things. The entire world changed in the 20s in that people were getting out, they were going to parties. A lot of progressive opportunity started within culture, which is really big positive thing for the world. And that was a big positive. So what I'm excited about, kind of what's happening now, Pablo, in the world, in terms of a business opportunity, is it's going to happen again. So we're already seeing it. I mean, the number of people that are just going out and doing things is just like absolutely tremendous. And that's still with some fear that people have of COVID. Once that fear starts decreasing, God willing, soon, then the number of people that are going to be going out is just going to increase like exponentially. And people's deep realization of life when they had social isolation is a terrible pain. But what that pain does is it also gives people the recognition of, oh my God, how lucky are we about something which we didn't appreciate beforehand. We didn't appreciate how lucky we were. And now we can have so much gratitude for the ability to get together in person. And we do, it's so much more meaningful. So that's my deep belief. Air travel, look what's happening in air travel. Like you said, restaurants, everything is kind of increasing. And just to say one other thing, Pablo, about churches, synagogues, mosques, etc. You know, I don't know what I believe. Let me like to be very open about it. God exists, God doesn't exist. What he wants me to do, not what I do, I don't actually know. What I do know is that I'm a very happy person and I live a happier life for me because of community. And there's so much like loneliness and isolation that so many people have. I'm not saying you have to have religion in your life, you don't. But I would say that you have to have community in your life. And religion is a way to have community, and there's other ways to have community as well, but it works across all religions and it's just so important.
I love what you're saying from so many different perspectives, but I think coming from an Orthodox person saying that makes it a lot stronger, right? The power of community. And going back, I talk about this a lot when I get to speak on different things. It's the power of relationships and community is, like you're saying, it's part of our DNA. Like there would not be a human race without the human race creating communities and hence becoming stronger than the animals around it, and hence slowly being able to build more and more stuff and so on. So a lot of people, oh, we have the opposite thumb or whatever. Yeah, that's a part of it. But the fact that we know how to work together to do something bigger than one animal can made us very, very unique.
Yeah, and it's just to add to that, just to go to how deep-seated it goes, humans are one of the only species that when you're born, you will die if you're left by yourself.
Correct.
You need to be, the attachment theory, you're attached to your mother, and the only way to survive is with it. Almost every other species can be independent, can be by itself, does not need to be attached to someone else. Humans are different, and it comes from the moment that we're born. And as we grow, if we want to raise families and raise communities, obviously, not everyone could do everything. So it's just so inherent.
So I want to take this, we started touching on the business aspect of this.
Yeah.
And you talked about the broader business aspect, right?
Yeah.
As the world, as an opportunity. I want to take it a step smaller, right? So to a business.
Sure.
Meetup has, again, I assume we didn't talk about how many topics there are, but probably any topic you can imagine, from people who do underwater basket weaving to people who design nuclear weapons. There's probably a meetup for that because there's so many of them. But I assume that a lot of them are business related. What's the benefit to a business of having a community that is somehow related or correlated to the business?
Okay, here goes. I'll share a few. So number one is there's a great video I was watching of Brian Armstrong, who's the founder of Coinbase. And someone interviewed Brian Armstrong and he said, how did you decide to come up with Coinbase? So he said, it was very easy. I knew I wanted to do something in cryptocurrency blockchain, but I couldn't figure out what to do. So the best place to do research was Meetup. I just went from one Meetup group on cryptocurrency to another Meetup group about Bitcoin, to another Meetup group about Ethereum, to another Meetup group about blockchain. And I went to dozens of groups. And based on that, I figured out what to do. And then I went to Meetup groups to then pitch my idea about Coinbase. And it was because of the community at Meetup or any other community that I researched, did focus groups to figure out what I should actually do. So that's one example. Here's another example. There's a great school called the Flatiron School. The Flatiron School helps to educate people to become engineers, to become data scientists, machine learning, etc. It's like a boot camp, one of these coding boot camps. And I remember I got together with the founder of Flatiron School, who actually, he went to the same high school as I did, called Ramaz. And he said to me, "You're not gonna believe this, David, but a majority of the leads that we get come from the community, the meetup communities that we built, and we use community as direct lead generation. So some people use community for focus groups. Some people use it for lead generation to become, members of their group. I was in Israel a few weeks ago, and I met someone who runs an AI consulting firm, and he has 19 different meetup groups in 19 different cities in Europe. I'm like, what the hell? Why do you have meetup groups in Berlin and Barcelona? He goes, oh, my number one source of leads for my consulting firm is all the meetup events that I host in different cities, because they turn to clients for myself. So you have direct revenue generation you get from it as well. Another example, I can literally give 1,000.
No,
examples.
go. Keep going. I'm not going to stop you. You're on a roll.
So Google has about 350 different meetup developer groups. And once a year, they fly every organizer of a meetup group to their corporate headquarters, because those are the influencers of influencers. So it's already, you're an influencer if you're going to a meetup group about, developing on Google, once a month. But you're the person who influences those people. So they bring them in, and they're the people who do all the beta testing. They're the people who go and talk about new features that Google is planning on launching. So it's another kind of way of kind of building business. So it can help you directly in revenue. It can help you in branding. It can help you in research. It can help you in finding co-founders. So for example, there's a number of meetup groups that literally it's called like Find My Founders. And people go and they pitch each other their ideas, and someone will be there and be like, dude, that's an awesome idea. Let me tell you about my background. And then like, hey, I'd love to be a co-founder with you about this. And there's literally thousands of companies that have found their co-founders and executive teams also through Meetup, which is, another way that can help you from business perspective. Last one I'll share is like, there's a huge overlap between kind of the personal and the professional, meaning people think, oh, I'm going to go to a professional networking event, and that's how I'm going to get like networking and find a job. I'm going to go to a personal event, that's how I'm going to get married or whatever, So a friend of mine who's a meetup organizer told me this crazy thing, which is a great story, which is that he runs two groups. One of the groups is a group that focuses on bowling, because he loved bowling. And he's like, that's for social. And the other group that he runs is a networking group because he wanted to build his career. So he's like, I've gotten my last two jobs from my bowling group, and I found like my best friend at the networking career group. So, it just speaks to like, again, from business perspective, there's a huge overlap. You want to get a new job? You want to build your career? Go hiking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You want to find that significant other? Play kickball. You don't know.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating what you're saying, right? Because one of the core values of our company is being relationship driven over transactional driven, which talks exactly about this, right? If you come to every meetup or any opportunity to meet people I want to build relationships and I want to have new friends and I really genuinely want to learn about other people and try to provide them value, then great things will come out of it, either on the business or on the personal side or in a parallel universe, but good things will come out of it.
It's the serendipity that happens when people meet that they think is just luck, but really it's intentionality. You're being intentional about creating your luck by putting yourself in a situation where you're surrounded by other people, and then great things happen.
I love it, David. Before I was talking about this thing at scale with community, I was really talking about networking and that basic function of the intention that you have with it, of adding value and just creating these moments that positive black swans can happen is at the fundamental level. But you've also really nicely illustrated in each of your stories a bunch of different speaking points that we talk about with it, and in no particular order. diversification, right? Like the idea that you don't have to influence just one person, you can influence many people. And just like investing, that's really, really good for you as far as relationships go, data gathering.
Also, before you say that, just I gotta riff on that one for a second. Not just diversity in terms of how much you can influence, but as importantly, how and from whom you could be influenced.
Correct.
Right? Because the goal in life is in many ways to contribute, and you contribute best when you're able to learn. And you could learn so much from other people when you have a diversity of differences, and community results in people who are totally different than you and coming from different perspectives, which leads to your like changing and your learning. Sorry, Pablo.
I'm really glad you interrupted me, man. Really, really, really well put, right? Like this idea of from other cultures and other contexts, we can learn so many solutions, right? And just apply it to your own context and culture, however you want to put it. So diversification, data gathering points, right? This idea of the Coinbase founder. I'm glad I'm not the only person that strictly learns from networking, right? Like that's really added a ton. That and podcasts have completely changed my life, just as far as inputs in my life. You also mentioned lead generation, right? Like I think lead generation is a really, really interesting one, and how you do that in a
not too salesy way.
Yes, please continue. Like I would love to hear more of this consultant guy that you were talking about.
I mean,
yeah. So I
want to sell, right? It's to figure out how you can add value and help people. And then if you're adding value and helping people by sharing your story, sharing your experiences, sharing best practices, people hopefully go to you and say, hey, how could you help me? And that's where a lot of times the best salespeople are just trying to help people. And then positive things will happen from that. Sorry, sir.
No, I just wanted to articulate the question specifically, because I think this is such a critical point in how do you really do this right? And it's a great point to dive into this, because you get to play to look like from a God's eye view, looking down into a huge amount of communities and look at the data, right? And look at the data and see what's working, what's not working, what's generating results, what's growing over time, what's kind of like fiddling away. And I'll start with the one we just touched on. You talked about providing value. What do you see people do in meetups that's really working, that's causing people to come back again, right? Because you can do one, but then there's, okay, you got some value. But if you can do this consistently, but to do this consistently, people need to keep on coming.
Yes.
And so you either have to continuously attract new people, or, which is obviously harder, or find the secret sauce that makes people come back. What do you see from data, from your experience, that makes people come back from a practical perspective? Because said, okay, you need to provide value. Okay, awesome. How do I do that?
Yeah, good. So what we like to say at Meetup is people come for the content and they come back for the community. So what that means is people will hear like a speaker, oh, David Siegel speaking, I'm interested in hearing that, or Pablo speaking, great, can't wait to hear him speak. But they come back because of the people that they met. So the data that we have is we could look at, and we do, number of chats that will exist prior to an event or during an event or after an event. There are interactions that an organizer will have with people in their meetup group at the event, in the event, prior to the event, after the event, etc. The more interactions there are, the more back and forth there is, the more relationship building that happens before the event, in the event, after the event, the more likely that people are going to be returning and coming back. The more that a meetup event is just a pure presentation of someone just speaking, and there's not the ability to kind of interact like you're going to be doing after my boring speaking, that's when people want to continue to come back to each other afterwards. So the secret sauce is the interaction between people and the ability of people to learn from each other, not just learn from a presenter.
I love that. I think it comes back to being very intentional about what you're doing, right? So if people think that them providing value, the most amount of value comes from, ooh, I know about this topic, I'm going to talk the most amount of time about this topic. While if you don't plan that engagement, if you don't set up, quote unquote, the stage, if you don't create the environment that will make this happen, and this could happen in so many different ways, right? It's a lot easier to do in small groups, but even in bigger groups, you break people into tables, you set up icebreaker questions, you you need to be the facilitator
Yes.
of those engagements, because otherwise they won't, sometimes they will happen. So if you have Pablo in the room, it will happen. But sometimes you don't have a Pablo in the room, right? You need somebody to make it happen, and it's your responsibility.
Yeah, so everything comes down to having a great organizer. If the organizer, let's say it's in person, every person, if someone comes in, they walk over to that person. They don't just walk over to the person, they make sure to pull that person to another person and they introduce that person to each other. They follow with the person afterwards and say what worked out well, what didn't work well. They follow with the person before him and they say, hey, what kind of people are you interested in meeting and getting to know at this event? So, by having that great facilitation versus, someone coming in and someone saying, oh yeah, no one walked over to me. Oy, like that's the worst. You can't have that. And then if it's a large group, again, like you said, bring a small group, and even online for virtual, there's ways of making those experiences to be, as interactive as possible.
Quick follow-up question to this. So you're saying, okay, have that facilitator from, let's say I'm planning an event, right? I want to start building a community, or I started having a community and I want to grow it bigger. What are like do's and don'ts or best practices that you see that over time gets amplified and work for people that have been, because I'm sure there are meetups that happen once and disappear. And I'm sure there's meetups that have been happening in the last 10 years every week without missing one. What makes those so unique? Like, what's the secret sauce that you see that makes these things be so successful?
Okay, good. So the first step I would say is understanding the importance of it's okay to start small. Too often people will have, do their thing and then they'll have then they'll want to have the first event. They want the first event to be 200 people, whatever it is. And say 5 people show up. And they're like, oh, no, hey, 5 people, including you, is 4 people that would never have shown up beforehand. And oh, guess what? That's like 20 relationships that you facilitated. A to B, A to C, all these 15, I think, relationships that you facilitated. That's a lot of relationship 15 that you facilitated. And guess what? After those 5, you're going to go to them and you're going to say, how can I involve you in helping to lead this group more? How can I involve you in helping to grow this group? So turning your initial people that attend into, don't have to be co-organizers, part of your leadership team. Too many times what leaders do is they think that they have to do everything. And they have to be the planner of everything. They have to be the facilitator of the meetings. They have to order all the food. They have to find the venue. They have to do everything. And then it's overwhelming. Well, instead, find ways, and this is true for management also, find ways of reaching out to your early co-founders and say, hey, how about you figure out who the person is going to speak next time? How about you figure out the venue? Be willing to ask for help. Be willing to ask other people to also bring 2 or 3 of their additional friends. If you start small, you can have 5 and it can turn into 5,000. I mean, it literally has in many times. So step 1 is perseverance. Step 2 is not being too controlling, but finding others to help you. Step 3 is consistency. Consistency is very important. If you have a group and you meet first time every week, and then it's every month, and then it's every 3 weeks, and then it's every 2 months, it's all over the place. Like, pre-set up your next 3 meetings. Ideally have them at, a set time, like the 3rd Wednesday of every month from this time to this time. Let people know that it's going to be at this time. Put it on your calendar that it's always going to be at this specific time. And it makes it a lot easier than having to get people another one. So just consistency is very important. Next thing that's important is you want new people, a new blood, a new life coming to a community. Because if it's the same exact people every time, fine. But the communities that really are thriving are ones where it's new people coming in and they add energy and they add enthusiasm into that conversation in ways that people have been. Same thing for companies. When you hire new people, it adds more energy into the company, than if it's the same thing. So consistency is very, very important as well. And then last, I mean, there's so many more I could say, but it's also just like feedback. It's like finding a mechanism to keep getting feedback, from the people who are in the community and saying, what could we do better? And being comfortable with, like, not defensive. What can we do better? How can we make this a more fun experience? How can we make this a better experience? Are you getting what you're looking for? Those kind of things.
David, you basically articulated 2/3 of our usual onboarding call, right? Like for when we're launching I don't know if you know this, right? I don't know if Isar reviewed this with you, but one of the services that we provide is this idea of if you do a weekly or every other week or monthly internet talk show like this, and you do it consistently, you build a community, and we repurpose it in a specific way. We call it relationship flywheel. But the idea, we've had this conversation 1,000 times. The idea of, hey, listen, your first show might have 3 people, and that's 4x the amount of people that you're going to make a relationship with if you were only going to interview somebody, right? Like,
wow, that's so funny.
The next thing we say is, you know, you don't want to be Superman. You want to create the Avengers, right? You want to enable the people that show up to
Oh
this.
my God.
Yeah, that's why we're so grateful for Don and Deb and Lee and Lori and Pratiti and Jerry, who show up week after week and bring us amazing guests like you, like Lori has done, and enable the whole thing. And then finally, it's always like, well, what's the perfect date time to do this thing? And we're just like, dude, you just got to show up every single week or every other week or whatever, same place, same time. And the consistency is what builds it. You got to build rituals into people's lives in order to drive this community thing. So you just perfectly articulated one of our big onboarding, like, core things that we do on our first kickoff call.
Well, that's because I was part of your onboarding once. I'm just kidding.
Fair, true. I want to connect this to a few different things and some of the questions from the audience, and in a really nice way. So first of all, you know, you talked about welcoming people to the room, right? And it's something that's very, very important too in the online world as well. And I think people in their heads, people who host meetups kind of already know when it's in person to introduce people, to bring them to the room, to make them feel comfortable, to shake hands with 2 or 3 people. Then you can let go. Now you handed that person off to somebody else and he can start engaging and so on. People sometimes fail to do this in the digital world. And, you know, we pay a lot of attention to that ourselves, and again, teach that to our clients. That's why we chat with people in the audience and welcome them and share their names and list their questions and introduce them in the beginning, like we did. We do this very intentionally, right? Because of exactly what you said. We introduce them to one another and so on. But it raises an interesting question that actually Deb asked. Meetup was built, by the way, those of you who don't know, Meetup was built after 9/11, right? Trying to connect people in time of sorrow to support each other. But now it's everything, right? So Meetup is built on human face-to-face interaction. Let's go and meet somewhere. The world in the last 2 years, not because we wanted to, went to, don't get near me, stay 6 feet away, preferably stay at home, but I still want to have a conversation with you. Let's do it over Zoom. How does that translate? Like, what are the things that you need to carry over, and how do you carry them over from the physical meetup world to a virtual meetup world? And so that's kind of like number one is like, what are those things? And number two is, how is Meetup? And you know, let's start with number one. I'll ask you the follow-up question after that.
Because there are people that have multiple questions. I'm
Yeah. No, I'll stop. What are the things
that's
that
a great one in itself.
And how do you carry them over?
Yeah, it's great. So I think you've used the word intentional a couple of times, both of you, and I think it's a really important word, because you can't just assume that just because you have the same people, it's going to work just as well in virtual as it's going to work in person. There are certain dynamics that are just very different for in-person versus virtual. So, you know, one of the things that I would say is there are roles that you need to have of people when you're doing virtual that are different than roles that you might need to have when you're in person. So for example, in virtual, if you have a meetup group or any group, you want to have a person who's gonna be like, I'm gonna be all over chat and asking questions in chat, because you can't do facilitation of the meeting and the chats and checking the time. So you want to ask each person to take on a defined role for virtual, which it's different than you don't need a chat person when you're in person, right? It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you need a dedicated chat person. You need a dedicated person to make sure that you're going from from a time perspective, like, okay, we have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, how much time left? Okay. You need the person that, if you do breakout rooms, is going to be facilitating different breakout rooms that you might be doing. But there's just a number of different roles that you're going to need for people to take on for virtual events that you may not have needed for in person. The other thing that you need to be even more intentional about, like we said, intentional, is like icebreakers. I just think in person, there's much more natural ice breaking that's going to happen of people just getting to know each other more comfortably. But like asking people to say very specifically something like, okay, name one thing about your weekend that you wish you had done differently. Could be, from the ridiculous to the fun, like just finding those kind of opportunities to get people to talk, because getting people to talk for the first time or ask a question for the first time is actually much more difficult virtually than it is in person. So you want to like facilitate that participation much faster and much earlier, as early as you can. Like I a lot of times what I'll say is something like, I'll start a meetup meeting and be like, okay, everyone put into chat what meetup group you've ever been to or something. And it gets people to start, participating in some way. And once you participate once, your likelihood of participating now a second time is so much faster than getting over the hump of participating that first time. Like I always love it when I'm in an audience or someone will say like, does anyone have any questions? And like, no one raises their hand. One person raises a question, they broke the ice, right? And so who has the next question? Like there's like 14 hands raised. So it's like, why are we all so reluctant to be the first person to raise your hand? Like, I don't get it, but that's just how people are.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is you need to really be more intentional about facilitating engagement, facilitating discussion, facilitating, getting to know people on a personal level.
I think something I've learned, I've done a lot of interviews with community people. One of the interesting things that I've learned that connects directly to this is when somebody raises a question, instead of answering it, think who from the community can answer the question.
Ooh, nice.
And that's like the ultimate handshake of you got to talk to so-and-so because he's actually better than me, the quote unquote facilitator of this on this topic. And now, you've really given the person who just joined a real sense. This is a real community. It's not Isar, it's not David, it's not Pablo. It's a community. But also, you've elevated that person, and you gave probably 6-7 different examples in this conversation of what you want to build a community. You want people to feel that it's their journey.
Yes.
Like if people feel a part of the journey, it's a community. If it's not, it's an audience. It's a very, very different thing.
Love it.
And so it's just another trick, is what you said, is how do you get people in the room, even if they're just chatting between themselves? If you're like, where are you from? And then people are like, oh my God, which university you go to? Now the follow-up questions happen dynamically and organically between the people because they now find things that are in common. So
nice.
Be intentional. That's like the word I hear the most. Something that we do, again, going back to Pablo and how everything you said connects to what we do. We provide that facilitator as a service to our clients, right? So Pablo and I have been doing this for 2 years. So we got pretty good about monitoring the chat and looking at the Q&A and doing the thing and asking the questions and but it's not easy. It takes a lot of experience. And even us having, for us, it's Ron and Joyce who are in as part of the thing right now. They will drop any link that we talked about. We talk about a book, there's going to be a link to the book. We talk about a website, there's going to, like, all these things that somebody in the back end that's taking care of making sure to host, to welcome new people. And they've done it in the chat today. It's huge.
And it's kind of like the difference between active and passive, right?
Correct.
And the ideal scenario is that everyone is active. Everyone is kind of leaning in versus leaning back. Because you know what happens when you lean back? You fall asleep. It's not that much fun to fall asleep. I mean, sometimes it's great to sleep. I'm a big fan of naps and sleeping, but like, it's hard to be like great community of sleepers.
Yeah, I agree. From a community perspective, it's not good. So I agree that thinking about those details in advance, whether you hire somebody or do this on your own, are critical for the success of it. Otherwise, it's very, very hard to do. I want to go back to the online thing versus the offline thing and switch to a different topic because I find it fascinating, and I know you do too as well. So Meetup, you're the CEO of the largest meeting organization group in the world, right? Then the pandemic hits. So there's no more Meetup, right? It just doesn't happen. It's not allowed in many countries. By the way, it's still not allowed in some countries now, which I find crazy, but it's meeting other people became impossible. Now you have a business that has grown for 10 years that became 20 years. Like 20 years that have grown significantly, became this amazing thing that everybody's a part of, and it stops like this. What do you do as the CEO? Like I'm sure the oh shit moment was pretty big.
You run into a cave somewhere and just start crying. Yeah. So I remember in like late February, we're in the middle of actually selling the company out of WeWork. So that already had its own kind of craziness happening. And in the middle of the sales process, we start seeing 95% of our events in China just shut down, like overnight, just gone. Every RSVP gone. And we're like, oh, you know, SARS was a thing, and Asian and the flu, you know, etc. There were things that happened that in China that didn't really happen anywhere else. We're like, okay, whatever, it's fine. I mean, I feel terrible for what's going on in China, but never going to happen here. And then suddenly we started seeing, like, in Italy, like Northern Italy, somehow every event just got canceled. Northern Italy, that's weird. Sure enough, the second case in one of the biggest hospitals in New York City called Mount Sinai Hospital was, in an irony of ironies, a Meetup employee who went to a super spreader event in like March 1st, so very early. And I was actually at that event too. I remember hugging that person that actually gave that guy COVID. And we were one of the first companies to have to vacate our office building, which of course made all the news, because like WeWork has COVID, you know, it's like, you know, any way that they could have say something negative about WeWork. WeWork has COVID, and it was at Meetup. So anyway, that all started, and then we went to virtual, and I got everyone together from the company, and I said, you know, the number one reason why we rejected Meetup organizers for the last 20 years, number one, was they wanted to be virtual organizers. They wanted to host only virtual events, and we said no, they're not allowed. We literally turned down millions and millions of dollars the last 20 years, probably tens of millions of dollars through 20 years, because people want to only host virtual events. And we were so anti virtual events that our founder, Scott Heiferman, got up in front of a big WeWork audience and took a giant sledgehammer and started smashing into, picture this on WeCrash, right? Started smashing into pieces the AR device and the VR device, because he was so opposed to anything virtual reality. So I got in front of everyone, I said, Meetup needs to go virtual. And there were a lot of diehards at Meetup, and they've been around the company for 10 plus years. And they said, we can't, that's against our mission. I said, okay, you know, let's open up our mission. What is our mission? Does our mission say that we're only IRL? No, our mission is about building real world, real connections. Real connections is what we said. Now, the best way to build connections, I still believe, is in person over online, but online, but we don't say we're not allowed to do online. So anyway, we got all the engineers together, and we had to immediately launch something, because every single organizer was threatening to quit Meetup. It was like a disaster, and it was really complicated. So within 3 days, we launched the ability to have virtual events on Meetup, which is very complicated. People don't know, because all of our code connects an event to a location. You couldn't have an event unless it connected to a location. And we didn't even have Eastern Standard Time, you know, Pacific Standard Time. We didn't have that because we didn't need to. It's in Berlin, it's in Berlin. You don't need to like worry about where it is.
Yeah.
So we found a location in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the Faroe Islands, wherever the Faroe Islands are, that hadn't had a Meetup event in a long time. And in the first 3 months, every Meetup, without people knowing, every virtual event was connected to the Faroe Islands, because you had to connect it to something.
That's awesome.
So we found like some you know, hack to figure it out. Then we rebuilt it so it didn't have to be connected. And since that time, in 2.5 years, we've had close to 4 million virtual events. 4 million, over 30 million people have participated in Meetup's virtual events. And the number of people who have said to me, if it wasn't for Meetup, I don't know where I would be from an emotional health standpoint, from a psychological health standpoint. There's a person that I'm close with, David Good. He's an organizer. He organized an event every single night of COVID, still does, every single night of COVID. And people just come on. They don't, someone who doesn't have friends, doesn't have something to do that evening, doesn't want to be by themselves. They just go on. He's created something called the International Friends Network on Meetup. And it was a savior for people. And now the number one question that we get from organizers is virtual events going to continue? And the answer is hell yeah. Of course it's going to continue, because for a lot of reasons. Frankly, like I talked to an organizer who runs a ecstatic dance Meetup group, and it was only in one city, Kansas City. And I said, how many people did you get? These here, like 7 or 8 people ecstatic dancing together in Kansas City, which is awesome. Who doesn't want to do ecstatic dance? Now the person gets 30 different people doing ecstatic dance from like people from 20 different countries all around the world. That's like an amazing experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, it basically, it really was incredibly deeply helpful for so many people, and it will continue. And right now it represents about 20% of Meetup events are still virtual. And that's been consistent for 3 months. It's not going down. So 80% is in person. Now in Miami, where Pablo is, meetup events were in person, 99% the entire time, because that's how things were in Miami. But in other places around the world, it wasn't the case.
In Florida in general, DeSantis basically decided there's no COVID in like July of the first year when everybody was still underground in the bunker.
Texas and Florida was always very high percentages in person.
It's like, well, this thing is not real. Just ignore it and keep on going. I want to ask one follow-up question to what you just said about the 20%. How many of those organizers do hybrid, meaning they either do, and what kind of hybrid, meaning do they do a live event and then they broadcast it, or do they do 1 week live, 1 week virtual, versus how many people just do either this or that, just out of curiosity?
What we're seeing is a ton of groups, almost a majority of groups at this point are hybrid groups, meaning they have events that are in person and they also have events that are online. And it could be that most of their events are in person, some are online. It could be most of their events are online and some are in person, but they want to do both. Very few events are hybrid events. We have many hybrid groups. We have very few hybrid events, because oftentimes to create a hybrid event, it's a lot of work to set it up in such a way that could be a great experience for both sides. Yeah. And if you don't put that work into an intentional, like you said, around it, I'm not saying I'm against hybrid events, but like if you don't, then what happens is someone's always the quote unquote redheaded stepchild, which is basically they get the worst experience. There are ways to make hybrid events great, because you could do certain things in virtual, like in chat and other things that you couldn't have done beforehand. But we're seeing very few hybrid events, but many hybrid groups.
Awesome. Yeah, and it makes sense. Like you're saying, creating a hybrid event that is really good on both digital and real life is very, very difficult. Like the logistics is just crazy, and hence probably a lot harder to do. I want to go back to the whole holy shit moment of okay, the world as we know it is coming to an end, at least for the foreseeable future. You wrote a book out of that, right? So you wrote Decide and Conquer, that is, the subtitle is 44 decisions. Here we go. 44. First of all, I love the name. Decide and Conquer is brilliant, but 44 decisions that will make or break all leaders. And I assume some of it came from that, holy crap, like it's not like, some businesses choose to pivot because something in the industry is starting to change. This was like an overnight, our business is over unless we change. Talk to me about that thought process and what led you to write the book, and kind of like a little bit what's in the book.
Yeah, of course. So I had, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but even from a young age in my 20s, I had always wanted to write a book at some point kind of in my life. I'm a professor in Columbia, and I teach entrepreneurship and strategic planning. So it goes to like my philosophy around the T of teaching, which is, a T is you could teach in person or teach a class, and you could teach a very small number of people very in depth. And you could also teach a lot of people potentially with a book. So a book kind of complements the T of teaching, really, really well. And my problem was I didn't want to write like a quote unquote boring business textbook, because I've read a lot of things where like you could basically summarize the entire book in like one page, and it's just 100 examples of the exact same concept over and over again. And the world doesn't need another one of those. So my favorite books have always been these crazy stories, like The Hard Thing About Hard Things, by Horowitz, or Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh, or even Creativity that Pablo, you and I talked about earlier. And just books that are these crazy roller coaster stories that leaders have had, and you take lessons directly or indirectly from the experiences of the leader. And that's the book I always wanted. But the problem was I led a pretty nice, positive life, not like a crazy life. Enter WeWork. So WeWork was the great enabler of craziness. And WeWork created so many. Oh, you just finished reading it, or you just started it?
I just finished Delivering Happiness, and The Hard Thing About Doing Hard Things.
Delivering Happiness. What a great book. Good.
Yeah.
So I love that book. So WeWork delivered so many crazy stories dealing with Adam Newman, and the culture clash between Meetup and WeWork, and this crazy sales process when WeWork needed to divest Meetup, and running Meetup during the pandemic, like you said, when you couldn't meet up in person, all those things lended itself to just these crazy, massive decisions that kind of I had to make and others had to make. And it's like the movie Sliding Doors. If I made one different decision, like the entire future, would have changed in very, very different ways.
Yeah.
So kind of I sat back and I literally exhumed the book in the first 2 months. I didn't have to commute. So I wrote 75,000 words in 2 months.
Wow.
And I normally what people do is they write like a table of contents, maybe a first chapter, whatever, and they give it to a book agent, and the book agent shops it out to book publishers. I didn't want any of that. So a friend of mine introduced me to HarperCollins, a big publisher, and I sent it to them with like grammatical mistakes and spelling mistakes and everything else. And they're like, wow, this is amazing. So, we edited it, of course, and that was the basis for the book. But the book was really all about decision-making. And the issue with decision-making is that people oftentimes don't appreciate the fact that not making a decision is a decision.
Yep.
And they don't understand that, like what Teddy Roosevelt said, the best decisions are great decisions, the next best decisions are bad decisions, and the worst decisions are no decision. And the importance of certain principles around decision-making, being speedy when making a decision, being honest and transparent when making a decision, because everyone knows everything and you can't hide anything. So just lay it all out there and don't pretend, because pretending is just going to make you look bad and you're going to lose trust, and trust is the most important thing that you can have. Just different, so I kind of etched out 10 or so key principles. Be kind when making decisions, because everything comes back to you and your reputation matters. And there's a difference between being kind and being nice. Don't be nice when making decisions. Be kind when making decisions. Sometimes firing someone is not kind, is not nice, but it could be the kindest thing you're doing for someone. So there's different principles that I believed in, and that's kind of the framework for the book. And so far so good. It's sold, I don't know, 10,000 or so copies, but it's been extremely, extremely meaningful in just getting stories. I mean, Lori, for example, who introduced us, read the book and shared the book with others, and you just, you have someone like a CEO from Indonesia, reached out to me and said, "Thank you so much for writing this book. I've been going through so many challenges that you really helped me with." Like, wow, I'm so lucky to have been able to have that kind of way of helping someone. So it's been great.
I'll say something about the last thing you said, because it gets back to creating content, right? You wrote a book, we produce shows and a podcast and so on. People from the outside of it are always look at the vanity metric, like how many books you've sold, how much money you made, how many downloads you have. Like, I don't care. Is that one email, that one, direct message, the DM on LinkedIn that says, "This was an amazing episode or amazing snippet. I really learned a lot. I'm going to implement this in my business." That's it. I don't need.
So
I don't need any other person.
So Isar, it's not about the quantitative; it's about the qualitative.
Absolutely.
And really, it's the qualitative. Like, I could look at all these numbers, whatever, on Audible, but I don't care. It's like you said, it's when someone reaches out, usually on LinkedIn, and just says, "This was such a valuable thing for me. I just wanted to thank you." And then I usually will say, "Oh, what resonated the most?" And then I'll get feedback. And it gives me such joy. And what that does is it motivates me to want to do more and help people more. So I think the learning for me is, you read a book, I'm talking to everyone on Facebook here, or everyone in the room here, which is like, go to the person and say, like, "Thank you. That was so appreciated." You don't realize it's like, I've said thank you to like relatively famous authors. And I was like, I can't believe they responded back to me. Like, what? Why is Daniel Pink, who's, famous best-selling author of Drive and many other books, I read one of his books, and I said, this is only after I wrote a book, and I said, "Just want you to know, such and such book really helped me. Thank you so much." You texted back, so it really, just try to find that, spread that love, basically.
I love that, David. And I think one of the things, first of all, we're about to hop into relationship-driven growth strategy sessions. You're invited. We don't expect you to stay, but just prep in our community that they're going to come up the stage here in 5 minutes. Something that I love about what you said is, and then I want to go to another question, is it's easy to think of the qualitative as this like feel good stuff. But what we find is that as a go-to-market motion, qualitative data is richer than quantitative data in that it can inform strategy, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you can learn.
yeah, it's a learning piece that you referred to early.
Yeah, I mean, in Lean Startup, it talks about the number one goal of a startup is learning. And the best way you're to learn is through understanding the context and everything else. That's all comes from qualitative, not some number.
Yeah,
Which
totally.
goes back to the best place to do that is through a community, because you get more of it from people who actually understand the subject, which is phenomenal. So
yeah, no, one of my favorite things has been doing like author Q&As or people who read the book. It's just like, that's the joy. When like you get a room of like 15 or 20 people who read the book, it's like, oh, that's the most fun. So John, when you or Deb, when you read it, we could do a Q&A.
I'm in, man. I can't wait. I've already recommended Jerry, who's in the audience. He's got a show called Best Places to Lead that I think you'd be a great guest on as well. So we're going to pump you up that way too. But I also, you mentioned something a little while ago of clarity and transparency and these things. And, one of the big things that we obsess about at Be the Stage is culture, right? And we're trying to build this like ownership mentality, team-driven culture. And we're trying to figure out ways to be more and more transparent, be it with financials or be it with the decision-making structure of the company, man. And as somebody that has so many war stories and so many crazy leadership things, I would love to, hear your take on how would you speak to a CEO that thinks, I can't let people in my company see how the sausage is made. I need to carry this load. I can't be as transparent as I'd like to. What advice would you give to that CEO?
I would say they already know. So don't bother hiding it, because they already know, number one. Because people read body language. People read what people say. People also will hear inconsistent pieces of information from different people and get uninformed. The other thing is, we talk about decision making. Well, if you want people to make smart decisions, which you do as a CEO, people need to be informed. And if they don't know that you're burning cash, then they might burn more cash, right? If they don't know that your priority is your revenue growth is shrinking, then your product manager may not be focusing on growing revenue. Like you want everyone to make the decisions that most align directly to what you care about as a leader and what the company needs. And they can only do that if they know as much as possible. So we share all of our financials. We show all of our KPIs. We tell everyone this isn't going well, this isn't going, this isn't going, this is going well, This is where we need to focus, this is where we not need to focus. We share everything. Anyone can get access to the same access of data and information that I get access to. I don't have anything that I can't get access to that anyone else can. So it's just, they already know. And if you want people to make smarter decisions, share everything.
Phenomenal. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we do the same. I used to work in a very large organization that usually this happens more in smaller organization. Over there, it was, a $1 billion company, hundreds of employees everywhere around the world. Same kind of mindset. You have access to everything. And then you cannot say that, oh, I made a bad decision because I didn't know, because you have access to everything.
Exactly.
And you can research anything. Like, you want to make a decision, going back to decision making in the book, like, you want to make a decision, you have all the data that the company has, which is hundreds of employees, hundreds of thousands of transactions every week that you can look at and analyze and whatever, with all the tools that we have at your fingertips, which helps you make the right decisions. David, this was nothing short of incredible. It was a lot of fun. It was a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. Great questions and participation from the audience. People are chatting like crazy and talking about the book and you and about Meetup and about strategies and so on, which is absolutely amazing. And Lori's here. Thank you, Lori. You're the one that made this all possible. So thank you so much. And we would love to chat with you again, or whenever you want to host us, or whenever we get together in any community kind of event. We would love to get together and have a few drinks. Thank you for joining us.
David, how do people connect with you, man?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
LinkedIn is great. Dawn is like the woman, so Dawn just shared it. So thank you, Dawn. Just send me a LinkedIn invite. This goes to everyone on Facebook as well. I like getting connected with people. Lori and I are connected, and Isar and I are connected, and Pablo and I are connected. So feel free to send me an invite and I will accept. And, great way to stay in touch, and we could message each other as well. And just wanted to thank everyone. And remember, keep connected, because life is always better together.
Awesome. David,
amazing.
Warm up your pipes for karaoke at CMX Summit. We're going.
I'm in.
Let's go.
Done. It's done.
Thanks for coming, man. Really appreciate you.
Bye, everyone.